Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to all gathered together virtually here for this event. My name is Gary Warner, and on behalf of the Concerned Lay Catholics Planning Group and Movement Laudato Si Movement Canada, I thank you for coming to our presentation today. Today, we are honored to have 4 panelists with us: Squamish Elder Deacon Rennie Nahanee, Bishop John Hanson, Mayor Ray Rubin Sr., and Father Toby Collins, who will be introduced more fully as we move along. As Honorable Murray Sinclair reminded us, Indigenous peoples have lived in balance with ecosystems since time immemorial, preserving natural bounties for future generations. We have done so out of love for our descendants and love for the community of life around us. Our wisdom does not privilege humans above all other beings, a spirituality of humility, not dominion. And in the same vein as Pope Francis remarked in a 2023 address, we should listen more to Indigenous peoples and learn from their way of life to properly understand that we cannot continue to greedily devour natural resources, because the earth was entrusted to us in order that it be mother for us, capable of giving to each one what is necessary to live. Therefore, the contribution of Indigenous peoples is essential in the fight against climate change. At this time of year, during the season of creation and the recognition of National Truth and Reconciliation Day, all people are called to live and act in harmony with Indigenous peoples in their role as responsible stewards of the land. We need to embody experiences together. And for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, it is a time to renew our relationship with our Creator through celebration, conversion, and commitment together. Concerned Lay Catholics in Canada is an independent group which came together in 2018 in response to the scandal of clergy sexual abuse in our church. Since that time, we have come to understand more deeply the critical role that the laity can and must play in promoting healing and reconciliation for all individuals and groups who have been wounded by our church. We endeavor through our various programs and activities to help lay Catholics find their own voice and bring it forth to live out the laity's role of co-responsibility in our church. At this point, I'm pleased to call upon Agnes Richard, coordinator of Movement Laudato Si, Movement Canada, Faith and the Common Good, and our important partner organization for this webinar. Agnes?
Thank you, Gary, for that warm welcome. And I'm grateful today for the technologies that enable us to have this meeting and conversation with people across the country. And I'm grateful to all of the attendees on this sunny Saturday afternoon to join us. Globally, the Laudato Si movement is a collection of over 900 Catholic member organizations dedicated to turning Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si into action for climate justice. It's a spirit-led movement that brings Catholics together to accomplish its mission in collaboration with all peoples of goodwill. Together, we seek to listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. The Movement Laudato Si movement in Canada, its partnerships and allies of Catholics across the country, strives to respond to Pope Francis's urgent call for social, political, and ecological transformation, and to animate the insights articulated in Laudato Si. We seek to ignite, inspire, and grow as a community of persons and institutions on a journey of integral ecological conversion, and that acts courageously to care for our common home. In Canada, we intentionally combine these efforts with work to understand and seek transformative action on the disproportionate impact that climate change and unsustainable resource extraction have on Indigenous communities. MLSM Canada is hosted by the Canadian Interfaith and environmental charity, faith in the common good. And I'm just going to take a little minute to plug an event that we are hosting later on this month. On September 25th, the Laudato Si movement in Canada is hosting our national gathering. It'll be a virtual meeting of animators, circles, and collaborative partners to share the vision of our movement. Because you are here, we understand that you share our values, and everyone here is most welcome to join our national gathering. I'll put a link in the chat box later. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to Gary now.
Okay, thank you, Agnes. And I now invite my CLC colleague, Andrea Kelly, to offer the opening prayer as well as the land acknowledgement.
We acknowledge that many of the lands we live, work, and meet on are on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples across this country. As settlers, it is our responsibility to learn about and acknowledge our colonial history and the ways in which we may continue to perpetuate it. As people of faith working for justice, we are called to discern how we are to respond to the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and how we can support Indigenous peoples across this land we know as Canada.
This prayer is from Laudato Si. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. Amen.
Amen.
So now, welcome back, Agnes, who is going to introduce our panelists and facilitate the discussion.
Thank you, Gary. So we have 4 panelists today. They're going to speak in 3 different segments. The first will be Deacon Rennie Nahanee. He will have a 15-minute presentation. After him will be Bishop John Hanson and Mayor Ray Rubin Sr. They will speak together in a 30-minute segment, and then that will be followed up with Father Toby Collins, who will speak in the last 15-minute segment, and then we'll have Q&A after that. I will introduce each speaker with a short biography before each of their segments. So Deacon Rennie Nahanee is first. Deacon Rennie Nahanee is a Squamish Nation elder and is retired from the First Nations Ministry Office of the Archdiocese of Vancouver. While coordinator for that office, he helped in the implementation of the Archbishop's directives regarding the First Nations pastoral vision and mandate. That vision involved alleviating struggles faced by First Nations communities and finding appropriate solutions while developing and promoting processes of healing. The office also looked to maximize opportunities for collaboration with First Nations organizations and communities by developing programs, resources, and projects that further First Nations ministry. I've known Elder Nahanee to be an outspoken proponent for Indigenous rights and traditional knowledge, as well as Christian values in our efforts to communicate and understand each other. Rennie Nahanee, you have the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to all the people out there. We're going to start off with a lament for Confederation, a speech by Chief the late Chief Dan George in 1967 at Empire Stadium in Vancouver. Although Canada was expecting accolades and thank yous, I think they came in for a bit of a shock, which they deserved. Chief Dan George, how long have I known you, O Canada? 100 years? Yes, 100 years and many, many Silenim, lunar months more. And today, when you celebrate your 100 years, O Canada, I am sad for all the Indian people throughout the land. For I've known you when your forests were mine, when they gave me my meat and my clothing. I have known you in your streams and rivers, where your fish flashed and danced in the sun, where the waters said, come, come eat of my abundance. I have known you in the freedom of the winds, and my spirit, like the winds, once roamed your good lands. But in the long 100 years since the white man came, I have seen my freedom disappear like the salmon going mysteriously out to sea. The white man's strange customs, which I could not understand, pressed down upon me until I could no longer breathe. When I fought to protect my land and my home, I was called a savage. When I neither understood nor welcomed his way of life, I was called lazy. When I tried to rule my people, I was stripped of my authority. My nation was ignored in your history textbooks. They're a little more important in the history of Canada than the buffalo that ranged the plains. I was ridiculed in your plays and motion pictures, and when I drank your fire water, I got drunk. Very, very drunk, and I forgot. Oh, Canada, how can I celebrate with you this centenary, this 100 years? Shall I thank you for the reserves that are left to me of my beautiful forests, for the canned fish of my rivers, for the loss of my pride and authority, even among my own people, for the lack of my will to fight back? No, I must forget what's past and gone. O Great Spirit, give me back the courage of the olden chiefs. Let me wrestle with my surroundings. Let me again live in harmony with my environment. Let me humbly accept this new culture and through it rise up and go on. O Great Spirit, like the thunderbird of old, I shall rise again out of the sea. I shall grab the instruments of the white man's success, his education, his skills, and with these new tools, I shall build my race into the proudest segment of your society before I follow the great chiefs who have gone before us, O Canada. I shall see these things come to pass. I shall see our young braves and our chiefs sitting in the houses of law and government, ruling and being ruled by the knowledge and freedoms of our great land. So shall we shatter the barriers of our isolation. So shall the next 100 years be the greatest in the proud history of our tribes and nations. Many of these things which the late Chief Dan George of Tsleil-Waututh mentioned in his soliloquy have come to pass. For people, our people that are in Parliament, our people are in many parts of society. Pope John Paul II, when he came to Canada, he had a lot of good words to say to my preference, Native people of Canada. And this is part of it, what he had said to the Native people. When the faith was first preached amongst the Native inhabitants of this land, the worthy traditions of the Indian tribes were strengthened and enriched by the gospel message. Your forefathers knew by instinct that the gospel, far from destroying their authentic values and customs, had the power to purify and uplift the cultural heritage which they had received. Thus, not only is Christianity relevant to the Indian peoples, but Christ, in the member of his bodies, is himself Indian. In our culture, our children are our future. The government took away our future when they took away our children. But we had knowledge keepers that were left that taught things which were taken away from us, like hunting, fishing, family life, leadership. In the Catholic spirituality, the boys are future priests, the girls and nuns. And for people that mistreat children, Jesus said that it would be better for them to be thrown into the sea than to bring harm to the children. We bathe in the river for mental and spiritual cleansing. The Catholic spirituality talks about water. It's used in baptism and cleansing and blessings. The Catholic Church talks about forgiveness, taking the sins away, they're cleansed, and we're able to start over. When we bathe in the river, we face upstream to receive what we need. When we face downstream, we are letting go. So you can see these are a similarity between our spirituality and the church. When the settlers first came to this land, they saw we lived in villages. So they called us the village people. If you know the song, that's a joke. The body of Christ, the church talks about. And it brings everybody together. Our communal life brings everybody together. The early papal bulls were designed to call us people of the Americas, people, not animals. For our part, we did live as a society which included government of the community. Jesus taught people how to pray. People prayed to the Creator. We did not need that when the missionaries came because we already had that. In the church, there are many cultural masses in RCAV, but no Indigenous. And this is going to be a change now that the church recognizes our language. John Paul, when he came to Canada, this is what I gather, that we would have a new way of preaching the gospel and the gospel message. As a deacon in the Catholic Church, I intend to make his message that he spoke about come true. In the church, the Lord's Prayer, part of it is about forgiveness. I had our Lord's Prayer interpreted, and I'll read it for you. Shoman Squamish. Shoman nana tachi tameo yeak wanel ta aswa asna. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Meyak ta aswa asyaman hoyak etewa tameo. Tima quisnes hoy. Tana cheth tameo. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Sachi toma chukui sathan chit etewa squile. Give us this day our daily bread. E minor chuk tak e wat seit sap chit. Tima quis minor chit tak e wat seit sap. To mouth as tanach stelmach. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. E wat ios tomoth quis house. Quat me te sa. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Path quis timath. Amen. In our land and in our culture, we used only what we needed. We cared for the forest and the river and the seas, that these things would be kept in place for future generations. We protested against deforestation on Vancouver Island. We protested against open pit mining. We protested pipelines. Laudato Si talks about the earth being Mother Earth, and that is our thinking also. This is our home, and we do not destroy the home that we are living in. We have new rules that are going to be coming into effect into the Squamish nation, that the Squamish people will not deal with people who cause harm to environment. The development of towers, in which we are building some of them, are to protect the environment, including limited parking spaces. All Squamish lands will be protected for the environment of our lands. This is in our own backyard. Our neighbors are another issue. CN Railway with their loud trains and their dieseling are polluting our lands. And I hope we get a little bit more in our war chest, that we take them to task for the harm that they are doing to our environment. Chen Quen Mantomi, OCM, OCI.
Thank you, Elder Nahanee. Thank you for reminding us of the truth of our history with the words of Chief Dan George, and thank you for showing us the connections and similarities that Native people's spirituality holds with Christian spirituality. That's important for us to understand. And thank you for letting us know what some of the current issues are for the Squamish people on Vancouver Island. These are things that we will watch for and try our best to support. I now have the pleasure of introducing both Bishop John Hanson and Mayor Ray Rubin Sr., who will take the next 30 minutes. Bishop John Hanson was born and raised in Grande Prairie, Alberta, and in 1998, he joined the Congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer. Studying at the University of St. Michael's College in Toronto, he graduated with Masters of Divinity in 2003, and the following year he was ordained to the priesthood in Grande Prairie. He then served as an associate pastor in several Redemptorist parishes, and in 2007 became the director of formation for the Redemptorist students. In 2009, he became pastor of St. Mary's Parish in Saskatoon for 6 years, during which time he worked in the areas of refugee settlement, social justice, and the Diocesan Commission for Truth and Reconciliation. In 2015, he accepted an appointment from Bishop Mark Hegmon to serve as pastor of Our Lady of Victory Parish in Inuvik, as well as to care for the missions and Bishop Hanson, you might have to correct my pronunciation, for the missions of Tegetchik, Tuktoyaktuk, and Palatuk, located in the Diocese of Mackenzie-Fort Smith. On December 15th of 2017, Pope Francis named John Hanson the 7th Bishop of the Diocese of Mackenzie-Fort Smith and Yellowknife. Bishop Hanson's Episcopal ordination took place on March 16th of 2018. Mayor Rubin was born in Cape Perry and raised in the hamlet of Paulatuck, both in the Inuvik region of the Northwest Territories. Ray Rubin Sr. is an Inuvialuit member appointed by the Inuvialuit Game Council to the Environment Impact Screening Committee, a collaborative venture between the governments of Canada, Yukon, Northwest Territories, and the Inuvialuit Game Council. As a family harvester and provider, Ray has always been very much involved with the local organizations and activities of his community. His interests also extend to the rest of the Inuvialuit settlement region. Mayor Rubin has been mayor for 18 years and was on the council since the hamlet of Paulatuck was formed in 1897. In 2012, Ray Rubin Sr. received the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, a commemorative medal created by the Government of Canada to recognize outstanding contributions and achievements to community life. Ray has been closely involved in his community, and his involvement reflects the importance of the land and the relationships and intimacy with the animals all around them. I now give over to Bishop John Hanson and to Mayor Ray Rubin Sr. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. It's really a privilege to be here. Ray and I discussed our presentation today that I would speak first and hopefully take the lesser part of our time, and we'll give the last word to Ray and allow him to speak a little bit longer because he has some very interesting things to share from his community. So as mentioned, I grew up in Grand Prairie, Alberta, which is considered a small northern city in Canada. But as a priest and a missionary to Inuvik, I got the privilege to go to a very northern community, an area of Canada which probably most Canadians will never get to. And now as Bishop of the Mackenzie-Fort Smith Diocese, I get to travel to even more northerly communities across the Northwest Territories and the territory of Nunavut. And some of these places I would guess that most Canadians also will never get to see. That being said, if you were to ask a typical Canadian on the street what their impression of Northern Canada was, like the most remote places of Northern Canada, I think you would get some very quick opinions. Most people do have an image in their mind of what Northern Canada is like. They may use adjectives like beautiful, pristine, vast, majestic, wild. And I would say that all of these adjectives, in my experience, do hold up. In fact, you'll find that the North is very beautiful, majestic, vast, and wild. But there is also another side, which I discovered when I moved there and I wasn't expecting. When you come to some of the smaller communities in the far north, you'll see so much, I don't know what the word I want to use is, artifacts from past industry. Let's just call it garbage from the past. Driving into the little community of Tuktoyaktuk, the very first thing you see when you come to town is the old rusty oil barrels, the tanks. There's a big old platform right out in the middle of a beautiful harbor that's just sitting there rusting away. So these are things that have, on the superficial level, spoil the pristine view of the Arctic and something which really looks out of place. There's also larger scars from the past, the dew line infrastructure, the military infrastructure that was placed for early warning during the Cold War. Much of that still remains. There's an old road that was carved through the Mackenzie Valley or Mackenzie Mountain wilderness that was used to transport machinery and oil during the Second World War. It basically tore up a historic trading route that was used by the Dene people of that area. And while nature has pretty well reclaimed all of that, a lot of these things that were brought up have been left behind. So you'll find old rusty trucks and cars and machinery of all sorts. Now, all of that is visible to the eye, but what's more insidious and invisible is the pollution that finds its way to the north. Pollution from mining activity. We face a lot of arsenic in our lakes around Yellowknife. Certainly the effluent from oil sands production and other industry coming down the river. On top of all of that, there is also the changing climate. The Western Arctic is the fastest changing region when it comes to climate in the entire world. It really is the canary in the coal mine for climate change. One story that was shared with me by some climate researchers was that as they were trying to do time-lapse photography of the erosion of the coastlands due to rising storm surges, they tried 3 years in a row to leave cameras on the bank of the ocean, far enough back that their cameras would be protected, but close enough where they could actually visualize what was taking place. 3 years in a row, they lost all their equipment because they underestimated how fast the banks were eroding, from 4 to 40 meters a year disappearing into the ocean. Tuktoyaktuk, one of the communities that I visit as a bishop and as a priest, is really facing the brunt of this, and Mayor Rubin will be able to tell you more about his community of Pawlatuck afterwards. So we face some serious environmental issues. And how do we address these problems, and what does Laudato Si have to say about them? I want to begin by describing two kinds of thinking, and I want to illustrate each type of thinking with a brief story. So please indulge me. So the first story is about myself and a group of friends hiking in the mountains. And we came above the tree line, and the rocks were very gray and bleak. There was no snow, so not too much to look at. It was very hot, dry, dusty. We came around the corner of a small natural canyon near the top of the mountain summit. As we entered into the canyon, the temperature of the air dropped dramatically. We saw water, steam, mist from the water rising up from rivers, little streams running into this little canyon. And because of the moisture, all of the rocks were covered with the most beautiful moss, and rivers of water running around the rocks covered in the green moss. And one member of our group spoke out loud. We all were taking in the beauty, and one of the members spoke out loud and said, "Wow, it's just like a Japanese Zen garden." And we all nodded our heads in agreement. It's just like a Japanese Zen garden. But then I realized, what backwards thinking. Here we were in the beautiful nature, and we're comparing a natural scene to something that we have created, that's something artificial, that Japanese people for centuries have used to remind themselves of nature, of the real thing, of something that would get them back into nature and meditate upon their own connection to nature. And here we had that beautiful experience, the real thing, and we were comparing it to something artificial. I'd like to call that type of thinking, in very simple terms, a Western way of thinking. It's very simplistic, but we'll just leave it at that for now. The second type of thinking, I share a story of a time that I went to a spiritual pilgrimage on the shores of Lake Athabasca. This was in northern Saskatchewan, where hundreds and hundreds of Dene people would gather each summer to renew their communal bonds and to celebrate their faith, and confirmations and baptisms were a big part of it. It was my first time there, and a couple that I had just met asked if I would baptize their child that afternoon. And so as I was talking with them and we're looking at preparing, I said, "It's my first time here. I don't know where everything is. I'll see if I can find a baptismal font so we can do the baptism." They looked at me like I had two heads, and they said, "What's a baptismal font?" And I said, "Well, that's where we'll baptize your baby so we can hold the water." And they looked at me and they said, "Father, the lake is right there." And sure enough, that was their custom at the spiritual pilgrimage, that the lake was the place for baptism. Again, I was thinking of what can I make? What can I find that we have? Our tradition is to capture water in something artificial when God has given us this big, beautiful lake where we can do the baptism right there. For the purpose of this talk today, let's call that Indigenous thinking or native thinking, using Deacon Rennie's word. These days, if we look at those types of thoughts, we tend to demonize one type of thinking and romanticize the other. So let's take the first, the Western way of thinking. Let's think about technology. We look at all the things that are wrong with our environment and we say, look at what technology has done. Look at what progressive ways of thinking has done. It's brought us to this point. Why don't we find a different way? At the same time, we look at Indigenous thought, native ways of thinking and culture, and we say, they have the answer. We romanticize and say, with a magic wand, we can just change everything back. If we just let people go back to the land and do the way they used to do, everything will be fine. I think if we look at those ways of thoughts with that point of view, we really will not get very far. First of all, we do need technology. Technology will, in some way, help us find a solution to the problems we are facing. The problem is not with the technology. From time immemorial, the Inuit people of the North have used technology. They've used fur from animals to stay warm. They've used animal oils to cook their food and to heat their homes. They've figured out architecture out of snow to build beautiful places to live in the wintertime. And of course, more recently, living in modern wooden homes. So technology is not the demon. And at the same time, Indigenous ways of thinking is not to be romanticized as the cure-all. First of all, that's completely unfair to ask the Indigenous people to say, well, we got you into this situation, we've ruined your home, we're going to turn it over to you, use your ways of doing things and everything will be fine. We know that's not going to work. And to think that we can just, get back to the way things once were is itself a bit of a myth. Time has gone and we can't just wind back the clock to the way things once were. So for me, this is the importance of the Laudato Si document. Laudato Si is important not just because it speaks about the environment, but it focuses on the attitudes behind our thinking that have been the problem that have brought us to where we are today. Pope Francis reaches out past the circle of Roman Catholic thought, and he turns in an ecumenical way to the thoughts of the people around him, of the world around him. And first he turns to the Eastern Church, and he uses the words or the example of the Patriarch Bartholomew from the Eastern Church. And he says this: at the same time, Bartholomew has drawn attention to the ethical and spiritual roots of environmental problems, which require that we look for solutions not only in technology, but in a change of humanity. Otherwise, we would be dealing merely with symptoms. He asks us to replace consumption with sacrifice, greed with generosity, wastefulness with a spirit of sharing, and an asceticism which entails learning to give and not simply to give up. It's a way of loving, of moving gradually away from what I want to what God's world needs. It is a liberation from fear, greed, compulsion. And then he becomes very theological as he says, as Christians, we are called to accept the world as a sacrament of communion, as a way of sharing with God and our neighbors on a global scale. It's our humble conviction that the divine and human meet in the slightest detail in the seamless garment of God's creation, in the last speck of dust of our planet. So in sharing this, Pope Francis draws attention to the fact that it is not technology, it's not knowledge, it's not progress per se. It is the attitudes behind that, and how do we recover the essence of what the gospel really has in store for us. As we continue the work of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, which really is just the work of building good relationships, Pope Francis finds the same kind of wisdom present there. He writes in Laudato Si, "It is essential to show special care for Indigenous communities and their cultural traditions. They are not merely one minority among others, but they should be the principal dialogue partners, especially when large projects affecting their land are proposed. For them, land is not a commodity, but rather a gift from God and from ancestors who rest there, a sacred space with which they need to interact in order to maintain their identity and values." I would go even a step farther than Pope Francis and say, not just when their land is being effective, but anytime we have large projects which affect the environment to a big degree, let us have as many people at the table as we can, so that our thoughts, our understanding of the effect of those projects will be understood from a more holistic point of view. I was reflecting on the ecumenical document Ut Unum Sint by John Paul II. He was speaking about ecumenism between the West and Eastern churches, and he used the metaphor of breathing with both lungs. I believe with Laudato Si, Pope Francis is asking us to think with both hemispheres of our brain, not just right brain or left brain, but bring it all together so that we can have the best understanding of our place in the world. Let us bring together the best of all worlds and let go of the attitudes that have gotten us into the mess we are in. And so I'd just like to conclude by thinking about what can we practically do as a church. I believe that the wisdom that Pope Francis sees in Indigenous culture is not unique to Native people. It is also a fundamental aspect of the gospel in which we believe. But we need to retrieve the essence of that gospel. Surely it is important that as we journey with Indigenous people on this path of reconciliation, with land and the land settlements and self-governments, we know that they have the self-determination over many aspects of their future, but we can continue to walk with them, continue to learn from each other as we do so. But for us, I think an important role is to clean our own house, to recognize that what goes into the river in Alberta ends up in the water of Tuktoyaktuk, that our desire for consumption always comes with a price that other people end up having to pay. We also have to continue the work of the decolonization of our church, an immense task. And yes, I believe the church has been colonized. The Church of Jesus has been colonized by bad attitudes, thoughts, and motivations. Nothing in the teaching of Jesus there is nothing in the teaching of Jesus that could have led us to this point, unless somewhere along the line it has been corrupted by false ideals. The church has been used to justify occupation, slavery, exploitation of resources and people, and nothing of that is in the gospel. We, as Deacon Rennie said, have to get back to the essential teaching that we are one family in God, one body of Christ, and that if one member of that body is hurting, it affects us all. So I believe that is what Pope Francis is trying to do with Laudato Si. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that many people are paying attention, so he felt the need to write Laudato Deum 8 years later, expressing an even greater urgency. And I'm very happy that our meeting today is a small but important step as we continue that essential work. And so I'll turn it over to you, Mayor Rubin, for your thoughts.
Thank you. I would have sat in here and listened to you much longer. So interesting. Yeah, hi, I'm Raymond Rubin, mayor with the Hamlet of Politics. I'd first introduce you to some things about our community. Like most small and remote communities across the north, a lot of things are in common with what I probably will describe. In the territories, we're the only on-land community that is a flying only community. All the other 32 communities have access by winter road or all-weather road system. So I call that, in my mind, fortunate in a lot of ways. Being remote and hard to access gives us ability to control, I guess, some of what's going on across the north and in the Northwest Territories. By that, I guess I mean development, mining, and all of those other things that the world seems to be depending on more and more. We're a small community of about 300, just over 300. We're probably one of the youngest communities, obviously in the territories, but in a lot of, for the most part, across the north. We celebrated our 50th year as a settlement in 2015, and we're preparing to celebrate our 60th year. So in terms of how long we've existed as a community or a settlement, we're young and we're still developing in a lot of ways. History before that was with the Roman Catholic Church. We had a priest, we had a mission built in 1937, about there. And that was the only building we had on the location that still exists now, our community. And we had a grotto built, erected in 1935 at that location, and it still exists. And it's still a major part of our community's prayer, and as needed for the most part. A lot of people in the smaller communities wear a lot of hats, and I'm thankful that a lot of our young people, following our fathers and grandfathers before us, stepping up and helping our community grow. About 10 or 12 years ago, I had put in a recognition, and I'm preparing yet another one, of all of our people before us who played a part in our development. You know, leadership comes in many forms, and I want to recognize that as a community. You know, it's not the mayor as they call that the leader. I take it as the mayor who works for the people. You know, I've been called a weak mayor, in the opinion that I don't say much. I know I've listened over the years. I've always lended an ear and try to understand in a lot of ways where our people's priorities existed. Speaking about a lot of hats we wear, I've kept as involved as I can in a lot of respects of our community. Like you said, I was the mayor now for 18 years and in a part of the Hamlet Council since 1987. It's something that now I'm not afraid to use as a tool to inspire others to step up and help not only our people, our region and the territories in a lot of ways. I've been involved with nearly all of our organizations at the local level, inspired sometimes by events that I feel were important. As an example, our park management board, those before me, including an older brother, was part of a group who developed this park, organized a working group and worked with the government and other agencies like Parks Canada, to develop this park. it's unique in a way that they developed that group or the park, which recognized our lifestyle, who we are, how we use the area. So when you think of a park, there are restrictions, there are like hunting restrictions, there's activities that are restricted. When they negotiated our park, they included our existence in the area. So we're not impacted by the government agencies and regulations and whatever that may be in any form of our cultural lifestyle. So we continue to use the area as we always did. The restrictions, the regulations are more geared to visitors and activities outside of our cultural use. As well, we have a marine protected area just outside of the community that was once the largest across the north. And I hear there may be one or two others that have been developed that are larger in area. But again, I'm here in Inuvik. We just finished a 3-day meeting to speak about the marine protected area. And again, it's unique in the way that we negotiated. And I was part of the team from about 2016 or something that negotiated this area. And the same applies in terms of our cultural lifestyle within that area. I use it with my family. I have been using it with my parents and those before me. And our existence and our harvesting is right in that area. So the way we negotiated that allows us to continue our cultural use in that area. And it's more regulated towards any development. And as we spoke to a lot of the shipping that's going on now, cruise ships and private ships. So we imposed, I guess, with the help of Canada and our regional groups, restrictions for shipping, speed levels, sea routes and things like that, so as to prevent any impacts to the environment in that area and the marine wildlife. So I enjoy that we're at a time when we're able to have a voice. I can remember earlier on from stories from my father and my uncles and aunts of how it once was in that area. We were not in control. Sorry, they were not in control then. I remember one story, and I'm not condemning, I'm not trying to put any negative thought into the way things were, but more as to the reality of how things were. I'm not condemning, I'm not negatively trying to record it as bad. It's just, as a matter of fact, the way it was. Because the voice then was the RCMP. I remember one story where they would go and do their patrols across the communities. And what they brought was a level of authority that impacted our existence. By that, I mean telling the people, my grandfather and his sons, that you can't get this animal or that bird or whatever, or else you'll be in jail, that kind of thing. I gotta admit that as to exist, people didn't always follow. They continued to exist, harvesting what they needed to put on the table. My late father, told of 2 stories of starvation. The first one, he was a young child. They had nothing. And I think that time his mother, my grandmother, they had caribou skins as mattresses to keep warm on the floor under their bedding. She had to take the hair out, skin it, cut it up, and boil it so they can have some nutrients. Starving, nothing else, no tea, no bread, anything. I know when he told me the story that the tears, as he remembered, were coming down as he was telling. He remembers it because he later became our leader, grandfather of our community, and for 24 years when we were established, he led our community, including our first co-op where we were able to buy groceries. He became the manager of that establishment. And he remembers, I know of one story, he says, I wish my mom was here today. She would never starve with the food we had on the shelves and that. But from that point of view, you know, and taking that as an example to continue developing our communities, is we have to always put ourselves on the ground base level of how we started and how we're continuing to live on. Our community was established based on the ability of the people there to survive with what God had provided, what the lands had provided. They sent a family from Inuvik here to live with our people for 1 year to convince the government that as a community we were able to provide for ourselves. And they did that. And the report way back in the 60s was that it could comfortably support a community of 400 or 500. Now we're at about 300, and we still continue to exist as they did back then. We were semi-nomadic as a community. Like I say, we're young. We're still following the animals. When the springtime, we're out in the camps. When the geese and the birds are back, and when fishing is good. Summertime, we're in the coastline. We're fishing. We're whaling. So we still continue to use the lands as they did back then. It's just that now it's from within a community. Before that, it was just a camp where people stopped by. And when the mission was built there, they started using it for special events like Christmas, Easter, and a gathering place. Now we exist, like I say, because of what is provided to us, and continue to do so. We're working as a community to protect through the Parks Board, through the MPA, what's around us. I remember talking maybe 20 years ago about how can we protect the shoreline, because we knew that the ice was depleting. There would be opportunity for more traffic, shipping. And we started talking about how can we protect our fish? How can we protect the coastline where they migrate? And over time, you know, the NPA come up, and we took advantage of that to help not only, I guess, Canada in completing its goal back then of about 10% of the coastline, but ourselves as well, to protect the habitat, protect the marine wildlife that we depend on and we live with. At a gathering with the Energy Board, maybe 15 years ago, that during our communications, we kept referring to caribou, fish, whales as our caribou, our fish, our whales. And I remember clearly because of one of them on the panel rose and mentioned that. He said he never heard any people relate to their animals as ours, our caribou, our fish. And that's always been the status of our relationship. We've always reflected caribou as being a part of who we are, especially the caribou we depend on. And it still exists today, our respect and our relationship with the caribou and everything around us. Because of so much going on, you know, one of the things that have been going on now is research. I think it began with science coming in and doing research. I remember the days when people would come into the community and only then we'd find out what they're doing. You know, I think over time we've shifted that around so that we're the lead in all our research now. We, as a community, prioritize importance of any of our animals and wildlife, and we develop, based on our questions, research we feel that is required, and it's to maintain the existence and the habitat for our future generation. We want our kids to enjoy as much as we did growing up. existing out of what is provided out there. And now, the way things are with the community and like, so I think now with the change in how Canada, I guess, right from up, back then it was up, down, but how now they recognizing as well the group here that the people matter, you know, we have a voice. We live in our land the way we've always lived, and we depend on it. So protecting it is we're adamant about it. And as one of the people striving to be involved, I want to protect as much as I can through these new developments and new ways that we didn't have before. The biggest thing to me is that we're heard now. We're not just accepting and opening our hands. We're working with the different levels of government. We're working with the industry. We're working with everybody around us. I think when I come to think about how the church evolved and grew with us through Father Leonce de Herdeman, who was our church, our priest for about 50 years. When I was a child, we'd still be in a camp. We didn't have homes, so we'd be at a fishing camp 30 kilometers or east or west. And I remember Father coming walking in the summertime to the camp so we could say a prayer, hold a mass. In the wintertime, he had dog teams. He'd go around to the different places where people were and provide church services back then to the small groups of mostly families in the different areas. And as we grew, like my father did, my dad was baptized by him, and so were all of us. We had that intimacy as well with the church through him. He represented everything good about the church. He grew up with our community. As a matter of fact, he knew our language better than most of our younger generation. He learned, I remember stories of him learning on my two uncles who had since passed on, 80 or 80 some years old. When they were children, he'd follow them around walking in the camps and ask, how do you say this? And how do you say that? And in our language. And I don't remember, I unfortunately, I lost a recording. I had a home video camera and I spent 2 days, about an hour and a half with him, and got a story from him of his life, beginning from his home in France and coming across Canada up to the north. And we had pictures as well. And back then it was the days of the VHS, the big, for a lot of us remember. And I made 2 copies. We didn't have anything digital, computer. And so I gave one to a preschool where our young kids go, pre-kindergarten. And I kept one for the family. And mine went missing. My boys, in their good heart, was cleaning out my house, my pantry and my porches, and my camera and videotapes for some reason ended up in the porch and they dumped it all. So I lost my personal recording and the VHS tapes. In there, he describes, like I said, his life and how he moved up to where he wanted to be buried. Unfortunately, they wouldn't allow, so he's in St. Albert with all the others. And yeah, I mean, he's in our hearts. With his 50 years, he's still in all of our hearts and souls. You know, he's a big part of, and he had a good way. He knew he would be leaving, and 5 years before he actually had to leave, he formed a group of us. So we were half a dozen, and we'd hold a weekly event of preparation with that theme of, when I'm gone, you are going to take care of the services that he had always provided on behalf of the mission. So for 5 years, he worked with us in all the different areas of catechism, the school programs, Sunday mass, and everything around that. He had a vision, and you know, the history, 50 years that he had concern and worry that we're going to have nobody to lead us. And he tried to bring that onto us. And fortunately, since he left in 1995, we have people who have stepped up. Some of our local people have stepped up and taken lead in our church services and continue today through now Marlene Wilkie. She continues to be there and prepare our weekly mass and continue with that. I know people, a lot of our community have backed away a bit, and now through the good grace maybe of diocese and our bishop, that with the interest of Father Fred, he's indicated that he would really like to move into our community, that we will have that person again to lead our and bring back a lot of the those that backed away from the church. You know, we have, I'm aware of some of our community members who have not been to any kind of mass celebration in 20 years, you know, and I can relate that in a lot of respects to some of the social issues that we're having, you know, not related to alcohol and drugs, and you know, and even suicide. You know, I linked that with not having the faith that we held so strong through Father's leadership, and I wish that, you know, in the coming years we're able to address that either through stronger participation in the community or somebody like Father Fred to come and help us and lead us. I know, Father Bishop, I was hoping that you'd take at least half of the presentation, and you did very well. Thank you. I can stretch mine as much and as far as I can, but really moving forward here, I can see that even with the challenges of having someone lead us in our faith, that there be ways that we address that through the missionary, working with the people that are motivated, you know, and I feel different feelings, but I had 3 people in our community approach me to take the lead, and as a former residential school student, I still, you know, as with a lot of people, we still struggle with that challenge. One of the things I try to stress to even my children is to in your mind and your heart forgive your past if there are any wrongs, and look forward, you know, and I think we have to get over that error and not dwell and make it a part of our life moving forward. It's only going to impact our kids and our grandkids and our community, and I think negatively. A lot of us that experienced a residential school were fortunate to gather or to learn positively, not only through academics, but because it was run by the Catholic. Because of that, as a 5 and 6 year old kid, I remember going to chapel at 5 or 6 in the morning because we wanted to. It was like another home, another comfortability that was open to us. And I remember putting my little face cloth at the end of my bed, and the sisters would come with their flashlight and look for who has a towel so they can wake us up and go to chapel in the morning. So I mean, although we've been hearing a lot of negativity from that era, I think a lot of us hold it as a blessing in a lot of ways. And we grew to have the best of both worlds, and we'll continue to have that. Our kids now are going to school in our home, and continue, for those who can or still do, go out and harvest and camp and fish and all of those good things that help us in a positive way to exist without, I think now we're finding with the community, a lot of the programs related to on the land and language camps are focused as a positive program. We always connect the lifestyle in the land with a positive attitudes and positive in a lot of positive ways. Some of the camps over time that deal with some of the addictions and negative things are based on the land, just because of that. It instills in you, and again, like putting you right back to that ground level of our existence. We need water today. We need wood. We need to gather some food to get on through the day, to get on through and exist. So that still is in our minds. You can see it clearly when springtime rolls around and the snow is melting and the animals and the birds and everything's coming back. There's that renewal of life, even from the people. People are more open and friendly and positive, and so there's that connection with the land that still proves to be positive, and we hope, and we're still developing ways to enhance these programs on the land to help
Mayor Rubin, you as well as the things that you are doing with the young people and the healing on the land, that's fantastic. You've been doing things that are using up-to-date technology to bring your community to sustainable living. You talked to me earlier about the idea of energy and transforming energy. Can you tell us in maybe about 5 minutes, and then we'll move on to Father Toby, what some of your energy initiatives are?
Okay, sure. Thank you. And yeah, thanks for keeping me in line. I tend to ramble on at times, and I said I was not going to take notes because I wanted to have a mind openly, and if you're able to lead me in something that maybe I'm not touching on, please. In terms of the energy group, about 2007, we had an energy workshop come together, and that was about the first couple of years as a mayor that I attended the function. And in there was plans to develop natural energy systems, and we zeroed in on wind turbines, wind energy. We decided back then that Tuktoyaktuk would be the pilot community to tap into wind energy, and we would be the second community. And we waited and we waited and we waited, and over time, the priorities of Tuk was turned over to natural gas and the highway and other things. So in 2020, I reached out. I knew of one of the guys who was a wind expert, and I said, we have to do something. I want something for our community. So we put through his expertise, we put together a proposal to Canada, and we're awarded about $500,000 to start off with our natural energy planning. So we developed a working group of representatives from each of the local organizations to help us begin planning to transition over to natural energy, because we dub ourselves, and it's part of our logo, that we are the south wind capital of the north. We get some pretty horrific winds and constant winds that we know the prevailing winds are south. And as a matter of fact, not last year, but the winter before, we had yet another house that blew off its roof. The wind blew off its roof. So we still get these nasty winds, and now as a working group, we're developing plans to put up a wind farm and tap into that energy. We've now come to partnership, and in July we held a partnership meeting with all our contractors and our government agencies and utility groups. We were probably about 15 or 16 strong that came of all of the different groups that want to help us in our endeavor to lessen the use of fossil fuels, you know, addressing what we originally had planned in about 2016 to decrease our emissions by about 25%. Before that, they were installing solar panels to some of our major buildings, but the utility told us that we've reached our 20%, and they cut us off from putting on any more solar panels. So we had to devise a way to get around that, and the opportunity came for us to start developing plans to make a major transition. And now, like I said, we're all three levels of government are on the table. We have two utilities, the NWT Power Corporation and ATCO, based out of Alberta. They're our partners now. We've got expertise from universities. The closest one, a university out of Whitehorse, who have experience with communities in developing these energy systems. We've now allocated and identified areas that we may be able to install these wind turbines. And as well, we've put up monitors to track and collect data for solar paneling, a solar array for a community. Because half the year we have good light, and well, wind is constant throughout the year, but winter time is when we get hit the most with the wind. So, you know, we're hoping that with development of both systems, that we're able to copy the communities in Alaska. We had a partnership with a UPIC group, and they own their own energy system, wind turbines, and they're servicing now about 12 of their communities with that kind of system. We're hoping through their example and their challenges that we're able to publish and help other communities through this develop their own systems. You know, we're not going to touch as one single community the decrease in greenhouse gases and stuff, but if we're able to spread it across the north, that'll make more of an impact, as you can imagine.
Well, that's really encouraging, and your efforts with your community, not only to learn, but also to help teach and share your knowledge, is really, really inspiring. And we've loved hearing all of your stories. Thank you. But we need to give a little bit of time to Father Toby to tell us about what he's been doing in Kitchener. So thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor. Yes.
Just really quickly, before we move on, we had a quick request from somebody to explain or show where Raymond is located. So I've just pulled up a quick map here. And so there's Paulituck, and I'm just going to zoom out just so that people can get some context here. Hopefully you can see that. So we're fairly north.
Yes, quite north. And Bishop Hanson, you're right. I would love to see some of those places, but I'm not sure I'm ever going to have the chance to. It's on my to-do list for someday.
Yeah, like you say, I look forward to answering any questions later on, and
Okay.
hear the rest of the presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank
And Agnes,
you.
just before we move on, I'd also just like to remind everyone that we will be taking questions and comments after our next speaker. So I would ask that if you do have a question for any of our speakers, or if you have a comment that you'd like to make, if you could just enter it into the chat function in Zoom, and we will take those questions and comments right after.
Great. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Father Toby Collins. He's the third of 7 children, and he early in his life met the Resurrectionists when he asked to help re-landscape the grounds at St. Louis Parish in Waterloo. He immediately liked the people there and what they do, and when the timing was right in his mid-20s, he began to discern a lifelong commitment to be with them, and more than anything, to give himself in the service to the church as a religious. Drawn to living community life with the Resurrectionists, he discovered that ongoing personal transformation is the key to growing in relationship with Jesus and leading others to the vibrant hope his companions the companionship that Jesus brings. Father Toby sees all the vocations as precious gifts to the church that grow best when prayerfully discerned within supportive faith communities. In 2007, he achieved his Master of Divinity at Aquinas Institute of Theology in St. Louis, Missouri. And then he had served as deacon and pastor in churches in Bermuda and in Hamilton, Ontario. And since 2018, Father Toby has been the pastor of St. Mary's Parish in Kitchener. To you, Father Toby.
Thank you, Agnes. Can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. Yeah, I was in Toronto School of Theology actually as part of the first part of my education. And I think Bishop Hansen and I were there together at that time. I remember our paths overlapping, so it's good to see him again. Thank you, Agnes, for just a warm welcome and this opportunity to speak. Because of time constraints here at the parish, I have ministry this evening I have to get to. I won't be here for the Q&A, but I'll just offer this reflection on what's happened so far here at St. Mary's. And also some of the background that kind of explains why I'm doing what I'm doing, kind of thing. So I was one of 7 children growing up, big family, and my parents were Roman Catholic and encouraged me to practice my faith, you know, and listen to what I had to say and how I responded. And you know, as I moved on in life, I had the freedom to appropriate the best of it and let go of some other things that I didn't see as that great, maybe challenge it in different ways. They taught me to be honest above all, help your neighbor, and leave things in better condition than when you found them. And so those are kind of staples in my life, things I try to live by as I learn and grow. Learning has taken me to a few different schools. One of them was the Aquinas Institute of Theology in St. Louis, Missouri. That's where the Resurrectionist community studies. And that's where I went. So I was, you know, really enjoying studies, but there were some things that were disturbing. And one of them happened in one of my theology classes when we were talking about the book of Genesis. And we were talking about humanity having dominion over what God had created. And the conversation veered into a direction where, you know, if the environment isn't doing that well, then we will create a more sustainable future by what we do and how we create. And I thought the thinking was backwards, and I questioned it in the classroom, and I still question it today because I think the word dominion is sometimes overused or misunderstood. I agree with every culture that believes that we have a relationship with creation. And when, as we know, when we're in relationship, it's different than having dominion over, control over creating ourselves. Yeah, so it's still disturbing for me, and I'm glad that it is, because I see no one culture really having all of the ways forward, the golden, you know, solution to climate change and other issues that we're having. But I think our Creator has given us all clues and gifts that if we collaborate and use the best of all that we have discovered in our own cultures, traditions, countries, I think we will find a better way forward. And this is the key, I think, to growing in relationship with each other and with the earth that provides for us all. From a Catholic perspective, the document Laudato Si was brought up a few times. I read it from cover to cover a day after it was printed. I happened to be in Rome visiting and loved it. Two of the things that I loved most was that I believe kind of indirectly Pope Francis was saying that God or Creator has given us everything that we have, and it's such a blessing. And so, you know, the question would naturally emerge from that, like how are we using this gift that we've been giving? I like the question, how is our mother doing? How is Mother Earth doing? I don't think we ask it nearly enough. Maybe we're ashamed, maybe we take things for granted, maybe we think they're ours and not somebody else's. But you know, there's so many things that are happening every day to sustain us that we have nothing to do with, and yet, you know, do we stop and say, you know, thank you, and how are you doing? You know, because our Mother Earth isn't doing well, I think we owe it to her to help her to heal. So that was one thing that clearly came out of the document Laudato Si for me. The other thing is Francis did well to intimately connect our care for creation, our common home, with our care for each other. So that begs the question for me, how is our neighbor doing? How are my actions affecting not just the people that live next door to me, that live in the same city, region, country, Turtle Island? This is global. How are people on the other side of the world? Because the environment's connected. We know this. And my actions, however small, affect people around the world. So how is your neighbor doing? And more to the point, do I even care? And to spend time with that. Because if we love our neighbor, Pope Francis is basically saying, you're going to care better for our common home because it affects our neighbor that we love. So those are just a couple of things that stood out for me from that document that really reframed how I think about creation and moving forward. When it comes to action itself, I've been pastor at St. Mary's Church in Kitchener for 6 years. When I got here, I did kind of a needs assessment and got an idea of where the congregation was at and also where our community partners were and where we could partner with people. One of the breakthroughs came with Indigenous people when Catherine Bergman, then president of St. Jerome's University, approached me and said, Anishinaabe Outreach has really been doing great work with us. And, it'd be worth your while to go over and to just introduce yourself to Stephen Jackson, their executive director. So I did that, and we got to know each other over time. He invited me to some events. I invited him to help me to educate my congregation about Indigenous peoples. And, we ended up doing some great things together. He came and helped us to put the grandfather teachings on different plaques throughout our landscape in the front to create a giant turtle and put some rocks in so that it would help people to understand more an Indigenous way of thinking and moving forward. There's a wampum belt there as well and so forth. So these are all teachable, concrete, things that we're doing. And of course, it's all online. You can do the QR code thing and everything. So that was a start. We're putting a land acknowledgement at the back of the church at the end of the month. We also kind of bartered with the bishop of the diocese, Bishop Douglas Crosby, to try and broker a deal where some land that the diocese owns, approximately 10 acres, there would be a free lease for Anishinaabe Outreach. And we were able to do that a few years back, and now they're growing medicines, the Three Sisters, and some orchards, some fruit trees. They have bees. They have a good part of it is an old growth forest with some maple trees that they're tapping for maple syrup. So, we help each other out with like weeding, and sometimes there's ceremonies that we get invited to and so on. So there's a lot of overlap there. At the parish, we have a reconciliation circle that we've started up, and it varies in number from 20 to 25 people since it was initiated about 3 years ago. And our goal is to continue to move forward in truth and reconciliation, and by getting to know more deeply the needs and concerns and cultural things and teachings and ceremonies of the Indigenous people around us, and how we can better educate ourselves about our past and realize that we weren't fully educated in many ways. And then invite them in if they're willing to come in and to share with us and in our circle of telling our stories. And there's been a lot of transformation that's taken place in people's lives because of our regular meetings and the different initiatives that we've taken on. Coming up in a couple of weeks, we're going to be following another Indigenous group near us, the Healing of 7 Generations. I've gotten to know Donna Dubé, who leads that. And she is going to go down to Victoria Park in the middle of the city. And there's thousands of people that come and listen to what Indigenous people are wanting, in terms of change. They also reflect on the past and what's been done. And we pray together for healing and new ways forward. So we will be marching down and doing that. And we also help the Healing of 7 Generations with donations to their youth ministry, and also they have a toy drive in December, so that's been useful for us to grow in relationship with Indigenous peoples and yeah, change our thinking really. So those are just some concrete actions I think some people wanted to know more about, and so we're doing those things. And we also have another project with it's called A Better Tent City, where we're allowing homeless people to stay in tiny homes and supporting them there with a central area where we have all of the amenities that they need, laundry, shower, washrooms, kitchen, but then they live in these tiny homes connected to it, about 42 homes with 50 people, and 20% of the people that live there are Indigenous. So we're getting to know our Indigenous brothers and sisters who are there and helping to support them as well. And they're teaching us, and really the gift goes both ways, and our minds and hearts are being opened, and yeah, just ways that go beyond words. I just want to conclude by saying that all of our work is based on a gospel passage that I believe if it's followed, it'll lead to great things. And that's Matthew 25. There's a lot of great teachings in it. The one that we focus on is that, when people are welcomed into heaven and they say, why are we here? And our Creator says, when, you did these things to the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. Hopefully we'll understand then, and maybe even now, that we're all part of the same family, as was mentioned in one of the speakers earlier mentioned that, but also in treating others with that kind of dignity and respect and trying to learn from each other, find common ground, apologize when we're sorry, finding ways to move forward, putting the other's needs first, those kinds of things, moving forward in truth and reconciliation. I think we're going to find the Creator is very pleased, and that we will heal together simultaneously with the planet as we continue to ask those questions I mentioned earlier. How is our mother, and how is our neighbor?
Thank you, Father Collins. Could you just repeat the date of that event that's happening at Victoria Park?
I believe it's September 30th.
September 30th? Okay, very close to Truth and Reconciliation Day. Thank you. So much that we've heard. We have now about 20 minutes, and I'm going to pass it over to Keith, who's going to help us with any questions that have come in.
So our first question is actually directed to Ray and Bishop Hanson. Given the amount of activity in the north in the areas of resource extraction and military defense, what role or should our bishops be playing in the Canadian public policy front to articulate the vision that Pope Francis has given in Laudato Si and Laudato Deum for the care for our common home?
That's a good question. One of the privileges of being a Northern bishop is that you get to keep your head down and don't have to be involved in too much of the high political stuff, which I appreciate. But the point, I take your point very, very clearly. In the last budget, I believe, I can't remember the figure, is $50 million or something like that, is being expended by the Canadian military to focus their attention north for military sovereignty and perhaps resource development, which is the reason that Inuvik was built in the first place. It was to establish a northern post for the federal government to be up there. So what do the bishops need to, do the bishops need to be involved? I think I don't think we currently are, but it certainly is food for thought, and something that I might have to do a little bit more research on. I don't know, Ray, if you have any thoughts about that from your perspective.
Yeah, as well. I think a great question. Just from a community perspective, I think that is reflected by a lot of our communities like ours, remote and small. And, I think a presence is one of the main things that we're looking for. Right now, we're receiving services on scheduled visits, and have been experiencing a lot of marriages and that. But my thought is that maintaining a presence and a lead in our communities is what we're looking at. like I said, a lot of the people now have been backing away and in the normal routine, weekly routine, and don't attend. I think that its impacts are socially are negative for the most part. What else are they going to do? Where else are they going to turn? You know, so we need a presence more than anything else. I think a lead.
Okay, thank you for that. We have a comment from Morgan, and I'll just read the comment, and then if any of you want to give your reaction, that would be great. So Morgan says, I want to think about settlers' collective obligations to seek and consume less. We tend to focus on the obvious: cars, fuel, airline, and mass diesel consumption, strip mining, and deforestation. But many of those systems are beyond the ability of individuals to affect. We can feel overpowered. But a key effective step for the rest of us, in quotes, is not to hoard the daily bread, not to produce food that is sold in excess for the sake of shareholders, so dangerous to the local biologies of native people across the land, and which becomes waste that consumes the capacities of the soil for no nurturing purpose. Overconsuming is something that we can ourselves control. This is a thought to complement the good work relayed by our speakers today, and to whom I owe so many thanks.
It's a great comment that stands on its own for sure.
Yeah.
I might disagree with the point about that one person can't affect, you know, by simplifying one person's life, we have no effect. We certainly can vote with our dollars, you know, buying local, buying used, reclaiming old things. I think if every one person took that responsibility seriously, we would make a difference. Yeah.
Right.
May I
great.
say I agree? It was myself who made the comment. I think the reason that I focus on food is because of its tie to land use, and because we all engage in this every single day. And when I say the waste of the land, it's both as landfill, but also the overproduction of food that steals nutrients from the land, because there's so much of it that it can't actually nourish people. And I speak from a sort of anthropology of health perspective when I get concerned about these things. But this has been so destructive to the health of people all over Canada. And in particular, when Raymond was speaking about the destruction of hunting traditions, and Deacon Nahanee, I was born on the West Coast, and I saw the limitations of traditional use of land taken away out there as well, in the 60s and 70s. And I think if I just am, I don't drive, I don't know how, but sort of those big things can feel difficult. But literally, if I'm not greedy with the daily bread, if I am thankful for the daily bread and do not hoard more than I need, then that can be a daily choice, or a 3 times daily choice, not to participate in the overuse of trains, not to participate in the overuse of diesel tractors, not to participate in the overuse of the land itself. So I take your point, Bishop Hanson, that we all can do these small things, but I'm pretty sure that I can guarantee that every human can think about this every single day, and the other things might be less consistent. So that's, and I wanted to thank Father Toby, who I think has left too, because of that piece in Matthew. I'm from St. Mary's Parish, and I think that extends very well to this point, that hospitality means also caring for the land and being respectful about not being greedy.
Thanks for that comment.
Yeah, one of the things about ordinary people, certainly to a point they can help. For example, banks which were financing ground digging corporations, mining, mineral extraction. These companies, particularly Canadian mining companies, working in South America, abusing the land down there, having people killed. They've used up a lot of resources there, and now they have come to roost in our native land. And what they got away with down there, we cannot allow them to get away with up here in Canada. The what I call environmental racism. If you look at the border of Mexico, because the rules are not as strict as the Americans, so the American companies build their trash companies and dump it on Mexican soil, Mexican land. Up here in Canada, they used to leave open pit mining, left it open. They didn't refill it. Deforestation. I say thank goodness for people that plant trees, the young people. It's the greediness of the Canadian corporations and off-sea corporations who are invited to come to Canada by our Canadian government that we have to watch out for. Thank you.
So Keith, I'm seeing a couple here that I'd like to share. Is that okay with you?
Yes, of course, of course.
Joseph Daly's saying Mayor Rubin's presentation was so hopeful, and the plan to replace fossil fuel with a wind farm and solar panels is indeed a major transition. Do you give a time frame for this transition, and could this be a model for other communities? Do you have any further comments?
I think, yeah, I mentioned that it's a goal to set some kind of publication that other communities can access and use at their pleasure. We want to record our trail through this here and hopefully to one day, and we're saying 7 to 10 years, you know, by the time we would have established the wind farm. And then short time later, the solar panel for the community. We're using examples from other communities who have been successful. We look at Old Crow in the Yukon, northern Yukon area. They've got a solar farm there. And as well, to the south of us, our neighbor, Colville Lake, I believe they as well have a solar panel farm. The motivation, I think, is there not only for us, you know, somebody had to move, and we want to help the north, the communities across the north, because it's always a challenge for somebody at a higher level to look at us and work with us. And now because the way we're doing it, they say is unique. It's a different way to accomplish something. Their ears are perked and they want to work with us to be one of the first group to establish something like this using the method we're using. And you know, I just wanted to quickly state that I have been to climate change symposiums and gatherings across, you know, right in Winnipeg and right down to Halifax area. And one of the things I keep in mind is the devastation of development to a lot of the communities across Canada. And, you know, we just count our blessings of being so far north and remote and only accessible by sea or air. That really has helped us maintain our status as cultural and traditionally existing. And we hope, you know, we had the mining company come in that I was talking about we had asked to talk to them directly first, and they were using the term rich in money. He said, your people could be rich if you let us in. And I had asked him for the evening's public meeting not to use money to determine richness or poorness. I said, look out our window. We're rich right now. We got everything we need out there. Use that term when you speak of riches, because you can easily fog people's mind by by saying richness only comes in money.
Thank you. That's, I really appreciated that observation, and also Deacon Nahanee's comments about environmental racism, because this is an issue around the world, as we know. And it is a place of solidarity for us as a global church, I believe. And Sabrina has asked a question kind of in that vein. I'm jumping on her question here, but to any speaker who wishes to respond, does synodality, which is now a global process that our church is engaged in, does it offer a new opportunity to walk a path of both responsible care of the earth and walking together with Indigenous peoples? Anybody want to make the link between what you're talking about and this global movement in our church called synodality?
I can, go ahead, Ray.
But, no, please.
I was just gonna say from my white man perspective, I can say that I've learned synodality long before it was a buzzword in the church from working with Indigenous people, because they do it far better than I've ever seen anywhere else. And up here we don't call it synodality, we just say we call it talking. We sharing circles, talking circles. You got to have patience. It goes on and on and on. But everyone gets to share, everyone gets heard, and everyone listens. So in Southern Canada, I think synodality can offer a great perspective, but from my experience working with Indigenous people, they've got that process nailed already. They're doing a great job with it. They're teaching us.
So quick follow-up on this, and this was directed to Deacon Rennie. And I don't know if this was true or not, but I'm just going to read it as such. There was, strangely enough, no Indigenous rep on the Canadian delegation to the Synod on synodality. So does the Synod speak to Indigenous people on the papal visit? How must the Canadian Church be changed to better address integral ecology and synodality, i.e. the vision of Francis? So so I guess the short question is, do Indigenous people feel included in that process?
I didn't take part in the synodality process in Vancouver because I thought it was like putting a new coat of paint on a church. I think we have to move beyond talking to action. If they had talked action, that would have picked my ears up. In a sense, we've been doing a lot of this work on our own already. And for the church to become involved in politics and all that evils that come out of it, especially from our Canadian government, who would probably find a way to punish the church if they spoke out against some things that they were doing. What I can't say about working together, and that has worked for me, is the translation of the Mass in our community, the commonality. Now, the commonality about that would be if the whole of the Mass is translated. Currently, the lawyer for the church says we cannot translate the blessing of the bread and water. We're not allowed to do it. The words are pretty simple. You don't need a theologian or you don't need to write a great big history about it. You're just translating those two sentences that are doing what they're supposed to do. Why can we not interpret that in our language and tell our people this is what is taking place? So if they want a commonality, they want to work together, that's an action part. They've moved some steps towards that, but they can go farther. I want to go farther. because I work both sides of the street here as deacon and as an Indigenous person. Amen.
If I can offer really quickly, I think through our history with a mission that through the actions and what they were doing, it's always been the idea of working together. I like that when they were brought up there, they didn't bring in new systems, new ways or anything. When they came in, they learned to live with the community, to live with the people. And like I'd mentioned, the language he learned, he knew better than a lot of our people because he studied it so much and wanted to be, able to communicate with people. And just by example of how he used the land, he would, if the church allowed, he would hire some people to get wood or coal or even fish. And that's exactly how we existed. And for them to come in and lead us in prayer and that while existing and living with us, that through that action alone, you didn't have to, go through workshops and learning and meetings, and you just lived the community life.
Well, I'd like to thank all of you for your insight, and I'm sure we could continue this conversation for some time. However, we are coming up on the end of our time. I think possibly, Agnes, you have some final comment before we turn it over to Gary.
Thank you. I don't have too much to comment, except that a very big thank you. It's too bad that Father Toby Collins can't hear this as well, but thank you, each of you, for joining us and for sharing your thoughts and for opening our minds and giving us a look at things that we might not have had a chance to look at otherwise. So very much appreciation for your participation here, and also for the questions that came in from people who were listening to us. So thank you very much.
So at this point, I'll turn it over to Gary for some final thoughts.
Okay, so thank you very much, Keith and Agnes. So it's my great pleasure to thank our remarkable speakers today for providing us with facts to consider as we face the ongoing dangers of climate change. I think with just 2 or 3 sentences, I could say something about each. Deacon Rennie, thank you for beginning and setting the tone with this lament for Confederation speech by Chief Dan George in 1967. Really set us on the right direction, and for reminding us of the alignment of Christian spirituality and Indigenous spirituality. And you referred as well to the steps, early steps in inculturating Indigenous culture in the liturgy. More to be done. And thank you too for the practical words about protecting the environment in Squamish territory and for bringing up the question of environmental racism. One of the thoughts of the themes I picked up from Bishop Hanson was his caution against the false premises that we might use. He used the term Western way of thinking. It's what Pope Francis called the instrumentalist or technological mindset. It's not that we don't need technology, of course we do, but it's that mindset that we have to be cautious of because it's a limited way of understanding the world. Caution as well against the simplistic romanticization of native culture. So I appreciated his call for conversion, with conversion that we get in Laudato Si and in Laudate Deum, in our way of thinking. And I liked his metaphors of breathing with both lungs and thinking with both hemispheres of the brain. And finally, your remarks about the decolonization of our church, corrupted at times by false ideals. We are one family in Christ and God. To Mayor Rubin, thank you very much for the valuable testimony in the practical implementation of care for the environment, care for the earth in the Northwest Territories. In the context of living in the present, where Native peoples are heard as partners, speaking nation to nation. And for Toby Collins, the 2 questions that he asked can goad us to action. How is Mother Earth doing? how is our neighbor here and elsewhere doing? We need to be asking ourselves these questions. And thanks to him for the testimony on how parishes can get more involved in truth and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and more broadly in caring and in carrying out actually the social teachings of the church. So I encourage all the participants to discuss partnerships with Indigenous peoples in your own environment and with the committees within your parish. We have our instructions from Pope Francis in both Laudato Si and Laudate Deum. Let's open our ears and our minds to the wisdom of Indigenous peoples and work towards partnerships to be protectors of creation. Regarding our co-sponsors, if you would like to help concerned lay Catholics in Canada and Movement Laudato Si, Movement Canada, to continue to offer programs to educate, engage, and empower the laity, and if it is within your means, we entreat you, please consider making a financial contribution by visiting our websites, and these websites, I believe, are posted in the chat. The https concernedlaycatholics.ca and https www.faithcommongood.org/donate. And I see a note here to please choose the second fund option in the drop-down menu. So we ask for donations because we are registered charities, and you will receive a charitable receipt for income tax purposes. Any financial assistance you can provide aids with the cost of providing quality programs and keeps them accessible to all. A big thank you to everyone who already supports us with your presence, with your prayers, your talents, and treasure. It is also my pleasure to thank all participants today, as well as the organizing team. Our prayer continues to be for lay Catholics everywhere to come together, to learn together, to pray together, and to act together for healing, reconciliation, and transformation in our church and in our world. And as you leave here today, we hope you've been enriched in your understanding of what it means to be church, that you've been confirmed in your faith and inspired to do whatever is given to you to do to build up the body of Christ in our place and time. God bless everyone, and thank you again for coming. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you.